kind of grown up here in Arizona. I came to Arizona in 2006. I had at that time a little one-year-old little boy and have since spoken here many, many times, including when I was sort of pregnant with my twins. And so I love coming to Sedona. It's a beautiful, beautiful place, and it's pretty spectacular to be surrounded by so many like-minded civil libertarians. So thank you so much for having me. And I do recognize a lot of sort of new faces. Welcome. Just to give you a little bit of background about me, I used to be a reporter. That was my sort of formal training, and I used to be a reporter in Miami, Florida, for the Miami Herald, which is where my parents are from. I'm a children of immigrants. My parents are, my dad's from Argentina, and my mother's from Brazil, so I had the luxury, and I guess the pretty amazing childhood. I grew up in a trilingual household with parents who were very committed to the values that are what I'm passionate about, the values of equality and fairness and justice for all, so to speak. So I started out at the ACLU in New Orleans in 1999 and then moved to Florida right around the time of Bush v. Gore. So that infamous presidential election in the year 2000 with the hanging chads and the debacle of that we all know what resulted in that election. So I was also there in Florida during the Jeb Bush's tenure and during his term as governor, when we had the ACLU was very much involved in the controversy surrounding Terri Schiavo, which has been getting a lot of, for those of you who remember Terri Schiavo, and raised important questions about the government's role in our right to die. And so that was a woman who was basically her husband, she was in a coma for many, many years, and Jeb Bush had intervened and had mandated that she maintain on life support despite the wishes of her family. So, you know, I mentioned this because I moved here to Arizona in 2006 thinking that we would be a little bit less hostile to civil liberties than Florida was. Really kind of shocked and dismayed that that's certainly not the case, that Arizona does kind of beat out a lot of other states. But I will, you know, things are getting better, I will say. We are now not in the headlines. Indiana and Arkansas have taken the spotlight away from Arizona. So Stephen asked me to talk a little bit about our work here in Arizona, and I'll sort of start off talking a little bit about some of the major victories that we had in 2014, and then wrap up talking about the legislature and give you sort of the good, the bad, and the ugly of the Arizona legislature. So 2014 was a pretty spectacular year. I think I was I here in November or October in the fall of last year? And so right around that time, we had, I'll just quickly recap some of the major victories. We won marriage equality in the state of Arizona, which was a huge, huge victory. I think at that time we became the 35th state, or the 32nd state maybe. Now we're at 37 states across the country that have recognized the fundamental right to marry that we all have. And so that happened in the fall. We secured driver's licenses for Dreamers, which was another major victory. We held Arpaio liable for violating the constitutional rights we won a pretty major case against the sheriff, and are actually going to be taking him to trial next week for contempt. So yeah, that's never ending, really. Arpaio, when I first, I'll tell you a little story. When I first moved here, I got a call from Arpaio's, somebody in his office, and they said they offered, they asked me to come by the jail so that I could get a tour of the jail. And at that time, we had about 7 or 8 lawsuits against the sheriff, and I thought, maybe that's not going to be, maybe that'll be a conflict of interest. So the sheriff keeps us very, very busy at the ACLU of Arizona. We, you know, we had this important victory. It was a pretty amazing decision that we got from a conservative Mormon judge who was issued a decision that resulted in a series of systemic reforms that the court had ordered over the next period, about 3 to 5 years. And Arpaio has deliberately ignored those orders and has been trying up until last week to get out of this contempt trial, and the judge is moving forward, so we're going to have a 4-day trial next week where we're going to lay out the case of why he should be held in contempt and should be sanctioned civilly first, and if that doesn't force him to comply, criminally. So I'm happy to talk a little bit more about that. But that was another major victory. We also had a major victory with regard to prison conditions here in the state of Arizona. Arizona has some of the most inhumane, deplorable prison systems in the country. We have dramatically increased the number of people behind bars, despite the fact that crime in Arizona, like crime statistics across the country, have decreased over 40%. Arizona has, as a policy matter, prioritized incarcerating people, most of whom are there for nonviolent offenses. And so what has happened is, as the state has struggled fiscally, they've started dramatically cutting the health budget and the medical and the mental health budget for the state, and it has resulted in death sentences for many of the inmates. And when we filed the lawsuit against the state in 2012, Arizona had the highest suicide rate that was twice the national average, which is what prompted us to get involved. And so I mentioned that case because the state of Arizona has agreed to a series of over 100 reforms that are going to improve the conditions of confinement and the delivery of mental and medical care. And I mentioned it because it's going to be a little relevant when I start talking about the legislature, because as you all know, we started out, this was Doug Ducey's first term, and you know, there was a lot of kind of question at the beginning to see exactly how that relationship between Doug Ducey and the legislature would work out. And you know, he started out the session very, you know, sending a clear message to legislators that his priority was introducing a balanced budget. The state at that time was facing, and is still facing, a $1.5 million deficit, which is a $1 billion deficit, sorry, $1.5 billion deficit. And so obviously that the two largest areas that the state funds are education and prison systems. And so what a lot of the legislators were doing is essentially sort of pitting the education, you know, the education community against the, you know, sentencing reform community, the individuals who feel like, you know, we need to really rethink our strategy of putting as many people behind bars, because ultimately it's not a strategy that is sustainable long term. And so I think there was, you know, so I think initially what the message that the governor had sent to legislators was, don't bring me any of these crazy bills. We don't need that you know, I'm focused on the budget and I want to prioritize that. And essentially he you know, rumor was that he sat down with Kathy Harrods of the legislature and the Center for Arizona Policy and said, look, you know, we want to focus on the budget, so let's behave. And then, you know, we're a bipartisan organization. The rumor was that he had instructed both sides, so to speak, to lay low and not bring Arizona back into the headlines for the wrong reasons. So I'm going to talk a little bit, as I said, the good and bad and the ugly of the legislative session. The good thing was that it ended April 3rd, which was, that's a huge plus, because it was one of the shortest sessions in history. And it means that the shorter, that the least amount of time the legislators are in office means it's the least amount of damage that they can do to our liberty. So, but I want to start off on a positive note. You know, the reality is that this fiscal crisis forced our legislators to kind of really rethink, well, why are we spending so much money on public safety, Department of Corrections, and to imprison people? And there were a lot of conservative legislators who very openly during the budget discussion said, I want to spend more money on students than prisoners. And I think it raises, you know, really interesting questions about you know, whether or not the Arizona legislature is serious about looking at these issues related to sentencing reform. There has been a movement, a bipartisan movement across the country where legislators, including in places like Texas and North Carolina, have really started to rethink how they imprison people and have been started investing in post-conviction release, which is a lot less expensive, and in strategies to help reduce the number of people behind bars, and then reinvesting that money in education. We saw that in California, that voters there passed some very, very significant reforms to to reclassify certain felonies to misdemeanors and then to reinvest that money into education. And so I think on the positive side, we saw conservative Republican legislators introducing sentencing reform bills this session. Steve Pierce introduced a really important bill that would have allowed prisoners to be released early and to transition into rehabilitation programs, and it would have resulted in upwards of 2,500, 3,000 individuals to have been released over a period of time. The bill unfortunately died in rules, but it was, you had the former Senate President, Steve Pierce, basically introducing it, and he's in a leadership position. It was a really important message that we are generating some more bipartisan support for this issue. Eddie Farnsworth was a sponsor of a bill to expand mental health courts in rural areas, and so mental health courts are diversion programs. It's to support individuals who are ill and need services rather than jail time, and it allows the expansion of these mental health courts in rural areas. And that was introduced by Farnsworth, and it ended up being signed by the governor, so that was a huge, huge plus. Another major plus is, as you know, a couple of years ago, the state had budgeted to build 500 new prison beds. We were at that time, we were the only state that was planning on building new prisons. Everyone is moving away from building new prisons, and Arizona, in its budget 2 years ago, allocated funding to build 500 new prison beds. At a time when we continue to rank at the bottom, 49th in the state in terms of per pupil spending. And so I think it was extremely discouraging that we had allocated these funds several years ago to build these new beds. But those 500 new beds and that proposal was not in the budget. Let me correct that. It was in the budget, but the governor said and the legislature said we're not going to fund it this year. So they basically kicked it down the can. We are hoping, that's huge, we're hoping that ultimately that little provision will disappear. And this was sort of the governor's way of just kind of appeasing some of the private prison lobbyists who are obviously very influential in this state. On another plus, we had here in Arizona, we introduced a bill to it was basically related to solitary confinement. As I mentioned, Arizona had one of the highest rate of suicides in the country because people with mental illnesses were being placed in solitary confinement in our prison system they weren't being adequately treated, properly treated, and then when there is some sort of a behavioral outburst, they violate prison rules, they end up getting thrown in the hole, and they end up, it's an issue that obviously is extremely, extremely inhumane. And so what we tried to do was convince the state of Arizona through a bill to increase the reporting requirements for solitary confinement so that we're collecting information about the ages of people who are placed in solitary, the race and ethnicity, so that eventually we can try to introduce a bill to ban the use of solitary for people who are seriously mentally ill altogether. The bill, it was introduced by a Republican, her name is Heather Carter. It got a hearing, which was a huge plus. It never ended up making it to the floor because the Department of Corrections very much opposed it, which is no surprise that Charles Ryan would oppose a bill that mandates greater oversight of his agency. But it was a victory for us in that it was important because we pulled together a group of mental health advocates who were very influential. We were educating the legislature about why these practices are so inhumane. So that was a huge plus. The other theme that kind of arose this past session was the police accountability issues. Following the deaths in Ferguson, Michael Brown and Eric Gardner in New York, and I think that some of the recent estimate that I read in the newspaper was that there is a shooting every 8 hours by police of individuals here in this country, and so that means there are 3 people that are killed per day by many of them unarmed black men across the country. We had Romaine Brisbane in Phoenix was another incident that made national headlines where a police officer shot him. He was unarmed, accused of allegedly being a drug dealer, and he was bringing dinner home for his family. And so the Arizona legislature, so here we have the country debating the issue of excessive use of force by police. And the Arizona legislature, now I'm getting to the bad, the Arizona legislature responds by saying, let's introduce a bill prohibiting the release of the names of police officer names who were involved in shooting for 90 days. And the sponsor of this bill was a gentleman named Steve Smith, and you know, this bill if passed would have really been very counterproductive. It would have increased the distrust that we already have between, especially communities of color and the police, and it was not necessary. So that was one of the, you know, it was particularly bad. Maybe this is in the bad and the ugly category, was because Steve Smith really used this bill as an opportunity to kind of perpetuate stereotypes against communities of color. And in legislative hearings would talk about if we release the names of the officers, there will be angry mobs outside police officers' homes. What we were able to do is pull together a broad coalition of not just communities of color, but also of members of the media who obviously are important. I mean, as a former reporter, I guess I'm a little biased here, but play a very, very important role in ensuring that government is transparent, and they play a government watchdog role, similar to the ACLU. And so we successfully convinced the governor to veto that bill, which was a huge, huge victory for us, because had that bill passed here in Arizona, we definitely would have seen copycat measures across the country. So we felt it was really, really important to try to get this bill killed. The other bill that actually ended up being a positive bill, even though it was introduced by Senator John Kavanaugh, was a bill that looks into the issue of body cams. As you all know, the body cams are becoming, there are some estimates that within the next 10 years, all of the police departments across the country are going to have body cams. We support the use of body cams. We think that body cams will go a long way to decreasing the incidence of use of force. It is a win-win for both the community and police officers. And there was a bill that was passed to create a study commission that includes both law enforcement and civil rights advocates, and in assessing and passing policies regarding the use of body cams. So I think there was some progress in the areas of police accountability, and we ended up not being in the headlines for that terrible you know, secret police bill. I'm particularly proud of our work around that bill, because my son came to me to a protest. I brought my kids to one of the protests outside the governor's office, and then he went and told his friends that you know, his mom is fighting a secret police bill, and the kids, you know, his friends were very intrigued by what I did for a living. But so that was another. I guess I put that in the bad category. Another bad bill that was introduced, but that luckily ended up dying, was a bill that you all are probably very familiar with, that would have criminalized the collection and the delivery of early ballots. That was a bill that was passed a couple of sessions ago that was repealed. It was part of an omnibus package of bills, voting-related bills, really intended to make it more difficult for eligible voters to cast ballots. And that piece of the bill related to the collection of early ballots was reintroduced this session, and luckily that one did end up dying. But you know, again, there are lots of groups both here in Sedona, and I'm sure many of you in this room, that are involved in efforts to help collect early ballots and deliver them, especially for you know, the elderly community. I mean, who do not have access to come to the polls and who are voting early but may not be able to get those ballots in. It's very helpful to be able to do that, to be able to collect them and drop those off. And so luckily that one ended up dying. Now I want to get, this is probably the fun part, is the ugly part of it. The ugly, ugly bill that ended up, I guess this bill, we were expecting this bill. This was the this year's abortion bill, because we can't pass we can't go past one session here in the Arizona legislature without passing a bill that infringes on the rights of women to make personal medical decisions. we were expecting this bill. So as you all know, the ACA includes a provision, the Affordable Care Act includes a provision that allows states to pass their own laws preventing women who are purchasing their own private insurance from receiving abortion coverage. And there are about 25 states that have passed these laws. Arizona actually did pass a law 2 years ago that said that anyone who purchases health insurance through any of the exchanges will not be eligible to purchase an abortion rider, so to speak, or additional coverage for abortion services. But there was a technical error in the bill, and the bill basically said prohibited the use of prohibited abortion coverage for state exchanges, and as you all know, we're in a federal exchange state. So it was a technical bill, it was a technical mistake. In theory, the state was just, this bill was supposed to just fix that problem and close that loophole. But Kathy Herod, in her what she did was introduced 2 additional provisions. Not one, the original provision which we were expecting, which says you can't purchase, even though you're purchasing health insurance and you're purchasing your own private health care coverage through an exchange, she added an additional provision to this bill that would have made the information of abortion providers publicly available. So, as you all know, abortion providers historically are at extremely, extremely vulnerable to harassment and even death. And there have been horrific cases across the country where pro-life extremists have shot and killed abortion providers. And so this provision of the bill would have been extremely, extremely dangerous. So she added a provision in there to make these doctors basically targets for pro-life extremists. The third ugly, ugly piece of this bill was they added a language in here that mandates that doctors, when a woman is Arizona has a mandatory counseling provision, so you've got to sit and speak with the doctor before you end up getting your abortion. The doctor is now required to state that if you get a medical abortion, which is the abortion pill, RU46, that there is a possibility of what's called reversal, that you can reverse the medical abortion. There is no scientific evidence. There have been no trials. There's nothing confirming that reversal abortions are even sound medicine. So the state of Arizona is forcing doctors to basically commit medical malpractice by now saying to their patients, if you take RU46, there is a chance of a reversal, despite the fact that, again, there is no evidence and there's been no research to substantiate that claim. And in fact, during one of the testimonies in the hearing, when one of the doctors supporting this provision, the only doctor supporting this provision, they asked her, well, where did you get this information about reversals? And he said, on Google. I kid you not. And so this provision is, there were very, very contentious legislative hearings. There were ACOG spoke, and that's the College of Obstetrics and Gynecologists spoke in opposition to this. And unfortunately, the good thing is on this bill, there was bipartisan opposition to the bill. There were a lot of concerns about this reversal consent requirement, and then on the positive note, they did end up introducing 2 amendments to this bill. One that would have that protects the doctor's information from being disclosed publicly, so that was a huge win. And then there was they added a provision for rape and incest. So if you do get, if you're in that horrific circumstance, that you would be eligible for an abortion, even if you are on the federal exchanges. So again, these things, it's like we were almost there. We were getting out of the session without another anti-choice measure. For us, this was a major priority because, what we've seen is there have been over 20 bills over the past probably 4 or 5 years, anti-choice bills that have been introduced in the Arizona legislature. We have been able to successfully kill most of the really bad ones in the courts, But what has happened is that they're sort of chipping away at that right through these administrative regulations and making it more and more difficult, especially for poor and rural women, women who live in rural areas. And so, so that was the ugly, nasty bill that surfaced and did make national headlines. So I think Kathy Herod reneged on her promise to the governor that she was not going to introduce extremist legislation. So that's kind of how the session ended. As I said, it ended on April 3rd, which was a huge plus because we could have gone until the middle of June, which would have been really terrible. And I think all in all, there was some progress. We did suffer a major loss. There was a lot of education bills that were introduced to kind of expand vouchers. And the charter schools, and I know that our partners in the education community very much were able to kill most of the bad ones, although there was some major losses, as you all know, to education community in terms of funding. So I just really, before I wrap up, I want to just talk about two proactive measures because I know that maybe Stephen had asked us to talk a little bit about this. What's exciting actually is that when I first moved here in Arizona in 2006, we spent most of our energy and resources kind of fighting back and beating down terrible proposals and on the defensive side. And we are at the point now in our state where we're allocating more resources to proactive measures, measures to, for example, advance non-discrimination policies across the state. We won marriage equality, but as you all know, you can get married, if you're a gay couple here in Arizona, you can get married in the morning and then you can be fired from your job in the evening or the afternoon. And that is, many people don't know, most people in this state don't know that there are no statewide protections preventing people from being fired simply because of their sexual orientation. So that is one of the measures that we're part of a coalition called Competitive Arizona that is working to change the both local municipal policies so that they are inclusive and so that they protect everyone to ensure that they're free from discrimination, and they're also working at the state level to pass statewide policies. So that's a really good example of how we're working across the party line to advance non-discrimination protections. And sentencing reform. As I mentioned early on, we do think we're in the research phase now, and we're having conversations with our partners here in the state of Arizona about moving forward with a ballot measure in 2016 that, again, targets that goal of reducing the number of people behind bars. We're not at the point yet where we know exactly, we've finalized the language, but I think it's a really important conversation that we're having with people across the aisle, because I do think, as a mother with 3 kids in public schools, that we need to really figure out how to reduce the number of people behind bars and then reinvest some of that money, a lot of that money that we're saving, into our schools, because we can't continue to be at the top of the list of incarcerating individuals and at the bottom of the list of educating our kids. So those are the two positive proactive enforcement measures that the ACLU is going to be leading over the next few years, and I'd be happy to take questions if there are any areas that you'd like to learn more about. And I really appreciate, again, having me here and the invitation to speak. We are, I'd love it if you all could check out our website at acluaz.org. We are an organization that does not take government money because we sue the government, and so that would put us in a little difficult pickle if we did take government money. So I'm proud that we do not take any government money, which means that we rely on the generous donations of our supporters. 80–90% of our revenue comes from the folks here in Arizona who have really stepped up over the last few years and have made committed donations to the organization to help advance this work. I think people are starting to realize that we are, we're an organization that is effective, we are strategic, and we are great stewards of your resources, and so if you would consider making a donation to the ACLU, we would very much appreciate it. It's what keeps this work alive, and whether it's fighting back against Brewer or Arpaio or our crazy county attorneys, and there are plenty of them across the state, by the way, We very much appreciate your financial support and your membership as well. If you're not a member, you can go on the ACLUAZ.org website and become a member of the ACLU. So thanks so much.